Sometimes your diaphragm selector shaft gets frozen for whatever reason, will not turn. To get to it, you'll have to take off the top hat. After removing 4 screws, take off the cover. After removing 1 screw, to get this cone wheel assembly shaft off, we're going to have to unscrew it out of the base. At the end of this shaft, you have 2 gears. A gear that's connected to your knob, and then a gear on your diaphragm shaft. When you turn it, it turns your diaphragm. But if we were going to unscrew this shaft, it's going to turn the gear, so that has to be freed up. So if this is already free, then it's okay to start unscrewing the shaft, because your gear is going to turn at the same time. But if your top gear is also frozen, you're going to have to loosen that up. So take out your screws. Use some lighter fuel, pour it in there. Try to loosen up this gear so that it will be able to turn. Once you've freed up that gear, then you can unscrew the shaft. It might be helpful just to go ahead and take your diaphragm wheel and shaft completely out. I'm going to do that by taking off the spring, because I've already gotten it loose. It's going to come out for me, but it might be harder for you. Just keep using your lighter fuel down here. Keep turning it to get it out. Once you get your top gear out, you'll be able to unscrew it. Since there is no tool available to unscrew it, I use a pipe wrench. Just be careful and just get it started. Once you get it started, it should unscrew. Now you're going to scuff it up, so be sure to file your scuffs up later and touch it up with some paint. Be very careful with these threads. They're very delicate. Something that's important is to find the exact location where it separates, because when you put it back in, you need to get it as close to where it came out to thread it back in, so that you start at the same thread that you took it out of. Because these threads are so delicate, it's really important to start it exactly where it came out. So as you're unscrewing it, you'll see that there's a little hole in here. That can be your mark, and whenever that comes out, that's the point of re-entry. It came out right here, so when you put it back together, you're going to put it right back into its original place, so you can start threading it back in. If later on the threads get messed up somehow, or you forget and it starts cross-threading, you're going to have to clean the threads out with a tap and die set. Here's the threads, 10 millimeter by 0.05. Once you get it out, you have to get your knob off by unscrewing it. You may have to use your lighter fuel to help you get it off. It's going to be frozen in here. What I did is I let it soak overnight. It's in WD-40. I heated it up to try to expand this outer casing so that I could pull the shaft through, but that didn't work. So I let it soak overnight, and it was still frozen. So the way I was able to get it out was I screwed it back into the housing, remembering right where it started. Now I've got something to hold this outer casing. I used a mallet and hit it a few times, and it moved in. So once you get it to move in a little bit, you can unscrew it. If it's still frozen, take your knob, use that as a support, put it back in the knob, and use your rubber mallet to knock it back through. Before you knock it through, wipe your shaft off of any rust that's going to be on it, and put some more WD-40 on that shaft. Center it on your knob and knock it back through. Clean your shaft again, re-lube it with some WD-40, and push it through again. If you have to screw it back in so that you have something to hold it, if it's not going to knock back in by holding it, then you're going to have to screw it back into your housing and repeat the process of knocking it through, cleaning it up, re-lubing it, putting it back on your knob, and knocking it down. If you do that a couple of times, it's going to start freeing up and will eventually release. You'll probably have a buildup of rust around your shaft. Use your needle file to clean that shaft up of any rust. Clean the inside of the housing here. Once you've got it all clean, it's time to re-lube it. Haag-Streit recommends number 3 grease. A little grease on the shaft. Put your knob back on. Put your screw back in. Make sure it's turning freely. If there's a point where all of a sudden it gets hard again, loosen the screw and tighten it back up without pushing against your gear, because that will free up wherever that hard spot is. It needs to be free, completely free without any hindrances. Once you've got all that, I use a number 2 grease on your actual teeth of the gear. Once you've got that, remember to reinsert it back in its original exit point. Tighten it back up with your pipe wrench. Remember to clean your top gear with fuel, lighter fuel, and also re-lube it with some number 2 grease. And then put it back together. I'll show you briefly after you've cleaned all this. You will have to re-lube this. If this was frozen too, with Haag-Streit recommends number 3. Don't forget about your little washer right here that needs to be there. After you've re-greased these threads, you can either put your screws back in or do it later. Try to center between the 2 screws. That'll help you later. Have to slip this in while it's going down. Once it's in that position, you can move your top gear into position so that it will fall in. These stops need to be pointing towards this surface. And your 2 posts, try to line them up right in between those screws. That'll be your best position. And bring it back down. Turn your diaphragm wheel to where the blue red-free filter is on top, the very back. Swing your spring arm back in. Reinsert your spring. Put your top back on. Your screws. Screws back in, and when you set it, you'll notice the blue red-free filter right there. That's where your 1 stop is going to be of your larger screw. Once you have your top on, put a couple of screws in. To hold it firm.